He was trained never to move, not for noise, not for taunts, not even for emergencies. But when the man collapsed just feet in front of him, gripping his chest, his face contorted in pain, something inside the royal guard shifted. In that split second, instinct overruled centuries of tradition. He broke formation. Outside Buckingham Palace, where stillness is sacred and every motion is measured, he did the unthinkable. He dropped his rifle, tore off his gloves, and ran. Tourists around him froze. Some screamed, others filmed. But while the world watched in disbelief, he was already on his knees, hands pressed to a stranger's chest, breath calm, movements exact. Because while everyone else stood there trying to figure out what to do, he remembered exactly how to save a life. In one moment, centuries of silence shattered, so one heart could keep beating. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Oliver Grant was the kind of man people rarely noticed until they needed him. At 34, he wore the Royal Guard's uniform with precision, impeccably polished boots, polished buttons, a stare that didn't flinch even under the scrutiny of thousands. Tourists often joked that the guards were statues, but beneath Oliver's stillness was a man who had once run through blood and sand with nothing but a medic's bag and instinct to guide him. Before Buckingham Palace, before the stillness, Oliver had been a military field medic stationed in some of the world's harshest war zones. He'd seen what most people wouldn't survive. Shrapnel wounds, screaming civilians, the dull silence of lives that couldn't be saved. He had treated soldiers under gunfire and civilians under rubble. His hands had shaken with adrenaline, but never with doubt. He'd moved fast, thought faster, and carried the weight of the lives he'd tried to protect long after the dust settled. But war leaves its marks, not all of them visible. After his final tour, Oliver didn't want noise anymore. He didn't want chaos or even praise. He wanted quiet, order, something sacred and unmoving. That's what drew him to the Royal Guard. Not for the ceremony, but for the peace that came with knowing your job was to stand still, to protect something that didn't explode or bleed or break. In this world, stillness felt like healing. He never thought he'd need to remember how to stop a heart from failing. Not outside a palace gate, not in front of tourists, not in ceremonial wool and gloves. But instinct, unlike protocol, doesn't wait for permission. And on that particular afternoon, when an older man collapsed to the stone pavement gasping for air, Oliver didn't remember the rules. He remembered the rhythm of chest compressions, the angle of the head tilt, the timing of breaths. Because when duty stood toe-to-toe with humanity, Oliver Grant did what no one expected from a man trained to never move. He moved. It happened in an instant. One moment, the sun was glinting off the palace gates, tourists laughing and posing for photos. The next, the sound of a body hitting stone echoed louder than any cannon salute. Howard Benson, 67, a retired firefighter from Manchester visiting London with his wife, dropped mid-step. His hand clutched at his chest as his knees gave way beneath him. He didn't slump or slide. He collapsed. His wife, Marion, let out a cry that cut through every conversation in the plaza. "Howard!" she screamed, dropping beside him. Her hands shook violently as she reached for him, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, someone help!" But no one moved. For the briefest, most shameful stretch of time, the crowd around them stood still. Tourists froze. Some took a step back, others began to raise their phones. A few reached toward one another in uncertainty, but no one rushed forward. It was as if they were all waiting for someone else to act first, and the man who did was the one no one expected to move at all. Oliver Grant saw it happen just 6 feet from his post. The sharp drop, the gasping mouth, the panic in Marion's voice. And then, like a gear clicking into place, everything he had once been surged forward through the uniform he wore now. He took one step off his platform, then another. In full ceremonial dress, he removed his bearskin hat, tucked it under one arm, and dropped to his knees beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" he asked, firmly, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. No response. Shallow breath. No pulse. Oliver didn't wait. He tilted Howard's head, checked the airway, and began chest compressions with practiced rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted under his breath, then called out to the crowd without breaking pace. "You, dark coat, call emergency now. You, blonde woman, stay with his wife, keep her back." His tone wasn't angry. It was surgical, clear, controlled. People obeyed. The crowd, once frozen, became a circle of reverent silence. Phones recorded. Some lowered them. Others cried. A child clutched their mother's sleeve. A man crossed himself. A woman began praying aloud. Oliver didn't notice any of it. His world had narrowed to the rise and fall of a chest that refused to rise, to the rhythm of life he was trying to restart. It wasn't about breaking rules anymore. It was about not breaking this man. And somewhere beneath the weight of polished buttons and centuries of stillness, a heart began to beat again. Guards are taught from day one, never abandon your post. No matter the weather, the crowd, the chaos, your job is to stand, to observe, to protect through presence alone. It's a code drilled into them with centuries of weight behind it. But that afternoon, Oliver Grant didn't hesitate to break it. Because while his body wore the uniform of a soldier trained in silence, his hands still remembered what it meant to save. As he continued CPR, sweat clung to his brow beneath the stiff red collar. His arms pumped with precision, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. Time warped. Tourists stopped filming and simply watched. Even other guards, still on duty across the courtyard, had their eyes locked on the scene unfolding in violation of everything they'd sworn to follow. When the palace medics finally arrived, 3 minutes after the call went out, they rushed in with defibrillators and oxygen, kneeling beside Oliver. But by the time they placed their equipment, Howard Benson was already breathing. Weakly, but alive. One of the medics, a senior paramedic with decades of fieldwork behind him, looked at Oliver and gave a simple nod. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Oliver stood slowly, muscles taut, gloves stained and slightly wrinkled. He adjusted his jacket, retrieved his bearskin hat from the ground, and without a single word, returned to post. He didn't face the crowd. He didn't speak to the cameras now being aimed like rifles at his back. He simply took his place, rifle upright, gaze forward, just as if nothing had happened. But something had. His silence now didn't signal protocol. It echoed something deeper. A man who had done what needed to be done, knowing full well the cost. The stain on his gloves was barely visible, but everyone who saw him knew it was there, and everyone watching understood. That stillness wasn't just obedience anymore. It was honor, redefined. By evening, the footage had spread like wildfire. From phone screens to television broadcasts, newsrooms to social media feeds, the moment a royal guard broke formation to save a collapsing man became the most shared clip in the world. Some called it a breach. Others called it bravery. But no one could look away. In the video, Oliver Grant is seen removing his bearskin hat and dropping to his knees with urgency and control. His red coat blurs against the cold gray of the pavement. His voice, steady and sharp, echoes as he calls out instructions. And when the medics arrive, the most talked-about image becomes the quietest one. Oliver, stained gloves and all, silently returning to his post. Within hours, the headlines split. Royal Guard breaks protocol. During emergency, hero or rule breaker. Tradition tested. Should guards ever abandon post? Critics came forward quickly. Former officers, protocol experts, and traditionalists warned about the slippery slope of reacting emotionally in ceremonial roles. He did what any civilian could have done, one commentator said on the live broadcast, but as a guard, he broke centuries of standing discipline. But the tide of public sentiment told a different story. Hashtags surged. Guard saved my dad. Royal first responder. Let him move. Veterans shared support. Nurses, medics, even firefighters posted tributes. That's what training looks like when it matters. Howard Benson's daughter tweeted, "He saved my father's life." You don't get to debate that. One post with millions of likes read simply, "Tradition matters." But so does breathing. The palace, as expected, remained silent, issuing no statements, offering no clarification. The Guard Corps declined interviews. Protocol had been broken, and protocol demanded review. But behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Then, quietly, unannounced and unexpected, a voice broke the silence. Prince William, attending a separate public event days later, was asked by a journalist off camera, "What are your thoughts on the guard who moved to help the man outside the palace?" The prince paused. His reply was calm, deliberate. "I believe tradition has purpose, but I also believe that when a man stands still his whole life and chooses to move only to save another, he's shown us all the highest form of service." The clip was just 9 seconds long, but those 9 seconds turned the conversation. It was no longer about protocol. It was about what kind of courage we honor. The desert heat had a weight of its own. In the dusty hills of Helmand Province, Afghanistan, Oliver Grant once knelt beside another man, his best friend, Corporal James Holloway, blood pooling beneath them as gunfire cracked in the distance. His hands, steady but trembling inside, worked fast. Gauze, pressure, morphine. A breath held between life and death. But it wasn't enough. James had looked at him, eyes glassy and distant, and whispered, "You're doing everything right." Moments later, he was gone. For years, that sentence haunted Oliver more than the loss itself. You're doing everything right. But the result had still been the same. His friend died in his arms. He wrote the letter to James's parents. He carried the dog tags home. And when the war ended, Oliver left the battlefield but never escaped the memory. Becoming a Royal Guard was supposed to be a new chapter, one without sirens or gunfire. One where his hands stayed still and clean. The silence of ceremonial service gave him structure, a peace built on unshakable routine. He thought that by standing still, by showing the world quiet strength, he might eventually stop hearing that whisper. But that afternoon, as Howard Benson collapsed just feet from him, the silence cracked open. The sound of Marion's scream, the panic in the air, the lifeless look in a stranger's face. It wasn't just a tourist emergency. It was a war zone flashback. But this time, Oliver didn't freeze. This time his hands moved fast again, on stone instead of sand, in ceremonial gloves instead of combat gear. But the motion was the same. Life first, questions later. He didn't need redemption. No one had blamed him for James's death. But deep down, Oliver had always blamed himself. And today, for the first time in over a decade, he didn't just relive the moment. He rewrote it. He didn't just save a life, he saved a part of himself. 3 days after the collapse, a formal request was delivered to the guard barracks, handwritten, sealed with care. It came from Marion Benson, the woman whose voice had cracked across the palace courtyard when her husband fell. Now, her words arrived in ink instead of panic, steady but trembling in their weight. She requested no press, no photographers, no spectacle. Just a private moment with the man who, in her words, stepped out of tradition and into action. Oliver agreed. They met in a quiet reception room near the inner courtyard, far from the gates, far from the tourists. Marion arrived alone, wearing a navy coat and holding a small cream-colored envelope in her hands. Her eyes were tired, but warm. Eyes that had watched death approach and be turned away. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked up to Oliver, placed the envelope gently in his palm, and nodded. Inside was a handwritten letter. No fluff, no theatrics, just truth. "You didn't just move," it read. "You gave me time. You gave Howard more birthdays, more breakfasts together, more stories for our grandchildren. You gave me more years to love him. I know you'll say you were just doing your job, but I want you to know it wasn't your job to move. You did it anyway. And because of that, my world is still whole." Oliver read the words carefully, silently. When he finished, he looked up at her, not with pride or humility, just with the quiet, grounded understanding of someone who knew the weight of a life saved. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. Once, but it was the kind of nod that said everything, the kind that said, "I'd do it again." Without hesitation, Marion reached into her bag and handed him a small photo. Howard in a hospital bed, smiling weakly but alive, his thumb raised in mock salute. "I thought you'd want to know what he looks like when he's not scaring the life out of everyone," she joked softly. Oliver allowed himself the smallest of smiles, not for the photo, but for the truth that followed it. Because sometimes the loudest thank yous are whispered in ink and sealed in envelopes. And sometimes the people who break the rules for the right reasons don't need applause. They just need to be seen. Days after the meeting with Marion, Oliver received a formal summons, this time not from his commanding officer, but from a private secretary of the royal household. No press, no public notice, just a simple line. Report to the East Wing. 900 hours. Dress uniform. He arrived early, polished boots gleaming, gloves pressed, posture straight. It wasn't nerves that tightened his spine. It was uncertainty. In the Royal Guard, breaking formation, even for the right reasons, was still breaking formation. He expected a reprimand behind closed doors, a stern reminder that tradition came first. But when he stepped into the room, there was no tribunal, just a colonel from the household division and a senior royal aide. And on the table, a sealed letter bearing the personal crest of Prince William. The letter was short, clear, and carried more weight than any medal. "Lance Corporal Grant," it read, "tradition is powerful, but life always comes first. Thank you for remembering that in a moment where it mattered most. Your discipline reflects the crown, but your action reflects our humanity. The balance of both is what service truly means." No speech followed, no commendation ceremony, just the quiet acknowledgement of a life saved and a role model forged. Oliver wasn't demoted. He wasn't sidelined. Instead, he was reassigned to a new internal unit, Emergency Preparedness Training for Ceremonial Guards, a position designed specifically to blend tradition with tactical readiness. To ensure that the next time a moment like that came, guards would know how to respond, with both discipline and compassion. As he left the room, Oliver didn't smile, but the nod he gave the aide was the same as the one he gave Marion, silent, certain, and proud. Days later, Oliver returned to the gates, not as a symbol of tradition alone, but as the man who reminded the world what true service looks like. He stood just as he always had, rifle in hand, gaze forward, motionless. To most tourists, he was just another royal guard, but for those who had seen the footage, for those who had read the story or whispered it across the crowd, his presence meant something more. People watched him differently now. Not with mockery, not with casual curiosity, but with quiet respect. There was reverence in the way some approached, pausing longer, their cameras lowered instead of raised. They knew, and the ones who didn't could feel it. He didn't move. That wasn't the point. The power of Oliver's story wasn't in how much he changed, but in the strength he carried beneath the surface. His stillness no longer looked like formality. It looked like readiness. That afternoon, a young boy, no older than 10, stepped through the crowd. His mother gently pushed him forward, a proud tear in her eye. The boy knelt quietly and placed a small silver pin at Oliver's feet. It was shaped like a firefighter's badge, just like the one his grandfather once wore. Howard Benson's grandson didn't say a word, and Oliver didn't break formation. But his eyes, fixed forward, blinked once, slowly. He didn't need to react. He had already responded. The gates of Buckingham Palace remain the same, ornate, imposing, timeless. The guards still stand watch, unflinching in their silence. But for those who witnessed what happened that day, or even just heard the story, something has quietly shifted. Not in the tradition, but in how we see the men behind the uniforms. Because now, when people look at a royal guard, they don't just see discipline. They see potential. They see a man like Oliver Grant, who stood still not because he was told to, but because he believed in what it represented, and who moved, not because he was allowed to, but because someone's life depended on it. His gloves are clean now, his posture perfect. But beneath the red coat, there's a man who made a choice that broke a rule, saved a life, and reminded the world that stillness and courage are not opposites. Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing meant going against what was expected? Would you have stood frozen by tradition, or moved like Oliver did, because something greater was on the line? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. And share this story with someone who believes courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just acts. We'll see you tomorrow with another Royal Guard story, one that speaks in silence and moves when it matters most.